Hello, this is Mickey. How's everybody doing? Well, today I'd kind of like to go over again the lens blur feature in Lightroom. I did a video on this several months ago when it first came out in beta, but since then it's been moved in production, and I thought I would spend a little time going through the use, the tips and tricks, shortcuts, and some use cases on how to use the manual settings and manual focus and defocus when you use this tool. If you're like me, you always find there's a lot of videos out there that cover these new features, but I end up going through 3 or 4 of them just to find all the information, because not one video contains every single piece, shortcuts and features and use. So I thought I would try to make the most comprehensive video I could in covering this new feature. To start out with, of course, we're in Lightroom and in the Develop module, and we're going to go to the Lens Blur tab and open that up by just clicking on the little reveal button. And to start out with using Lens Blur, you have to click the Apply button. When you click the Apply button, Lightroom uses AI to determine what the subject is and apply focus to that area and defocus to the areas around it. And it does that by creating a depth map. Now, if you look at the tab, the Lens Blur tab, and you see an ellipsis, 3 dots over here, that means that the camera that you used already created a depth map and put that data in the photograph itself. The only one that I know of right now is the iPhone. And as you can see right up here, this is a HEIC photograph. I took this specifically to show users, because I haven't seen anybody actually show it yet, of what it looks like when you have a depth map already built by the camera. And you can do this by using the portrait mode in your iPhone, and it will create a depth map. Now, if it's a depth map that you don't want to use, all you have to do is click on this ellipsis and say uncheck use device depth. And when you do that, Lightroom will then use its AI and determine its own depth map without using the depth map that Apple did with the iPhone. So to start out with, the first thing that we're going to run across is the blur amount. It's very simple. As we move this from 0 to 100, it will increase the blur that you have in your photograph. So we take it all the way down to 0. You can see we have more focus on all these cameras. When I take it up to 100, we start losing focus in the back. All right, and that's determined by the depth map, and we'll talk about that in just a second. All right, the next feature we want to talk about is bokeh, or bokeh, tomato, whatever you want to call it. And actually, bokeh is just the visual quality of the out of focus area of your photograph. And of course, bokeh is affected by your lens type, your aperture opening, the type of light or how much light you're coming in, and how many soft reflective areas that are in your photograph to where the bokeh is generated. I'm going to move to a different photograph so we can see a little better. And we're going to be looking up in this area of the photograph right up here. Let's change this right back. And what we're going to be looking at is the quality of our bokeh here as we make changes. Now, bokeh has 2 features to it. One, the type of bokeh you would like to display in your photograph, and then how much of it. And we use the boost. So if we look at this area right here now, I have the boost turned down to 0. We really don't see much bokeh at all. But if I move it up to 100, you can see we have a nice bokeh that starts to develop in these lighter areas of our soft focus. The first type of bokeh is what we're looking at now. It's just called circle. Plain and simple, it's what we find in most lenses, most current modern lenses. We'll see bokeh like this. The next one is called bubble, and it looks a lot like circle, except it has more of a lighter inside with a brighter ring around it. The next one is called 5 blade, and this is what we find in older lenses. The shape of this is determined by how many blades are in your lens to open and shut the aperture. So the older lenses that have less number of blades, we see things like this. But it's still a nice effect, and that's 5 blade. The next one is called ring, and it's kind of like bubble, but it has a thicker outer ring and less lightness in the center. And the last one is called cat's eye, and it's just because of the shape of the cat's eye. So that's all we have with bokeh control. Once you determine what kind of bokeh you want to use, like we're going to choose 5-blade here, we can then use our boost and move it back and forth to determine how much of the bokeh we want to display. All right, here we are back at our original photograph, and we're going to talk about the main core tool that we find in Lens Blur, and that's what's called the focus range. It has several pieces to it. I'm going to take them one at a time so I understand how they all work together, because this is the most important part of this tool. The first thing that we'll notice is this big bar across the center here, and this is our depth map. It's showing us what depth of field, how much depth there is to the objects that it finds in the photograph. So that's why you see these peaks and valleys. They correspond to objects that have a lot of focus from front to back to areas that don't have any focus. It's very flat. So that's why you see these little flat areas here. And then the big spikes are these objects in the photograph that have a lot of front to back or depth of focus in them. The next thing we see is this bounding box. The bounding box shows us what area of the photograph is in the focus range. So right here we can see this area is in focus in the photograph, and the rest of the area of the photograph in the back is not in focus. Now, to help us see that a little better, we have this little box we check here, and it's called Visualize Depth. So it's showing us by color what is in focus and what is not. All right, so anything in yellow and fading off to orange, that is in focus. Anything purple to black, that is not in focus. Now, let me stop here for just a second and explain one thing that I've gotten comments on. If the photograph in its original form was not in focus, these areas right here, this tool will not bring them in focus. It might focus them a little bit, but they will never be in focus. So don't use this tool thinking it's like Topaz Sharpen AI. It is not that. It is only to bring an aesthetic focus and defocus area of your photograph to bring more attention to your subject. All right. With that being said, we can now start moving our focus range box through the photograph to help shape our focus. Now, when we move this box, you'll see things are either white or purple or yellow. Anything that's in white, when we move this box, that is going to be the subject of focus. All right. So if I release here and I turn off Visualize Depth, you'll see that this area right here is now this area, corresponding area, and it's more in focus than the front cameras are, which are represented by this part of the map. All right. Now we can also change the range of focus to make it more specific or more broad. And if we move this over to our front cameras and we start narrowing down our box by grabbing one of these bounding boxes on the side, we now have a much narrower focus. So you see we have mostly focus in the center, and it's getting softer off to the sides. Now, as a shortcut, you can hold your Option or Alt key down and then click on the bounding box, and as you move it, it will automatically show us our depth map and our focus map so we can make a better determination of how we want our focus to be. Keeping that alternate our Option key down, and we can widen up so we can see how much more we want to be in focus or how much less of the photograph we want to be in focus. All right, so that's using that Option key is really just a good way to determine how your focus is going to work instead of keep clicking Visualize Depth and unclicking Visualize Depth. So just hold your Option key down, determine how much of a range that you want to be in focus, and then move your focus range box to the area that most suits you for that type of focus in the photograph that you need. Now, Lightroom has given us a couple tools in our focus range area to help us determine what we want to be in focus. The first one is the subject tool right here, the subject icon. And when we click on that, it's going to bring us to the exact area that Lightroom had determined was the focus area and the focus subject in the very beginning. So if you've shortened up your focus range, you've moved it to a different part, and you just really want that subject in focus again, if you click this icon here, the little man icon, it'll bring the original setting that you got when you hit the apply button when you started up Lens Blur. The next icon is a focus assist icon, and it will let you select the area that you want to be in focus, and by how large an area you select, it will widen up your focus range. So remember, focus range is this area within the bounding box, and then the focus area is the area in which you want the focus range to be applied. So let's just make it real narrow, and we're going to be focusing on this front camera. But what I really want to bring to attention is this camera back here. So I'm going to click on this little bullseye box, and I'm going to draw a box around this camera. Now I'm just going to draw a medium-sized box about like this. And you can see it brings the focus area to this here, and you can see how wide it made the focus area. And this wideness of the focus range box is determined on how big you make your bounding box with this tool. So let's go over here, and I want to grab all these three cameras here. I want them to be in focus. So I'm going to hold my mouse button down, and I'm going to drag across all three here and release. And as you can see, it makes a very large focus range box. It moves it to the area that these objects are in and sets the focus automatically that way. So this is just a really good tool to help you determine exactly what kind of focus area you want it to be in and what kind of focus range you want to use. All right, now that we've talked about the more of the automatic way to set our focal range or focus range and using our depth map to get everything in focus or blurred that we want, we now have to talk about how we're going to do this manually, because you know using this tool here will not automatically get me everything I want every single time. So we need a way to manually focus or blur an area, and to do that we use the brush refinement tool. If you don't see this brush refinement tool, just click on the little reveal icon here on the right hand side, and it'll show you all the tools. With this tool we can add focus or add blur to our photograph by manually brushing it on. Once we select one of the actions, the tool comes active, and these controls are the very same as any adjustment brush in Lightroom. So the amount is how much blur we're going to put in, the size is going to be the size of our brush, the feather is how hard we want the edge to be on our brush, and flow means how much of the effect that we want to put down each time we brush across the photograph. All right, in this instance, I want to blur all the cameras except for my main subject camera. And typically we could narrow down our focus range, very narrow, let's say. We'll put it right here, and it does a good job of bringing this in focus. And because these are on the same focal plane, not really good at defocusing these, and I actually lose some focus on the back part of my camera. So we're going to have to do this manually. Now before I start, I just want to let you know there's a little idiosyncrasy to this tool, to this brush, and that is once you brush in an effect and move to a different brush or add a new brush, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second, it will commit that change and you can't go back and modify it. All right, the only thing you can do is get a new brush and add more focus or add more blur if they weren't at the point that you wanted them to be at. All right, so we're going to start out with blurring this camera, and I'm going to show you what I mean by choosing a new brush to blur this camera. Because if we use the same brush here and then continue on over here, when I make an amount change, it's going to affect them both the same way, and I don't want that. I want this one to be very blurry and this one to be semi-blurry. All right, just as an example. So I've chosen blur. I want 100%. I want it to be very blurry and a medium feather, and I'm just going to paint right over the camera here. Let's turn auto mask off because I don't need that. And you can see we've blurred out this whole camera. Now if it's too blurry, I can come here over to the amount and I can make the correct adjustment to give it just the amount of blur that I want. Now since I want this to be a different blur amount, I can't just start painting because that will affect this too. So what I'm going to do is I hit the plus mark. That gives me a new blur brush, and now I can apply blur over here, and I just want this to be slightly blurry. All right, so I can take the amount slider and bring it way down, And you can see it's not affecting this one because we chose a different brush. All right. So just remember, once you commit, when we chose this new brush, once we committed this one, we can't go back and fix it. All right. And as soon as I choose another brush, we can't go back and fix this one. So I'm going to choose a new brush, focus, and I want to focus this area right here. Now, one thing that we can use, we have two tools to help us clean this up by applying focus. Number one, we can use auto mask, which means that any color or luminance my little plus mark is over, that's the only area that will affect the effect be applied. But we can also turn back on visualize depth, and as you can see, as we paint, we get a change in color showing us it's more in focus. Now this is kind of messy, so just give me a break. I just wanted to show you using a depth map can help you. All right. So by using depth map and auto mask, you'll have a really good chance of staying in the lines so that your blur tool looks very good. So let's turn visualize depth off, and now we can see we have this one very blurry, this one semi blurry, and we have everything in focus here on the main subject camera. So that is how we use the manual tool to really refine our focus range when the focus range alone isn't enough for us. Now what I want to do now is go to some other pictures and show you how we can use these manual controls with our focus range tool to get the best picture we can using our lens blur tool. All right, in this example, I thought it was just a good example of showing how if we use our focus range that we can get everything we want out of this picture. So looking at the photograph as Lightroom determined AI what was in focus and what shouldn't be in focus, it's just way off. So the first thing we want to do, I'm going to hold the Option key down so we can see what's going to be in focus, and then I'm going to use my focus range slider here. I'm going to start narrowing it down. So I want the front and the back of the flowers to be in focus with the trees being out of focus. So I'm going to grab the back slider here and I'm going to start moving it out till I get just the trees in purple and none of the flowers. So about like that. Now let's release and look at our picture. We have a pretty far range on our focus, and as you can see, all my flowers are in focus from front to back, but we kept our trees out of focus. Now if we wanted to make sure, because it looks like there might be a little bit area here that they're still not in focus, we could grab the focus and we'll keep it real high. We'll make our size really small. We'll keep the auto mask off, and we'll keep the feather really tight so we don't have it flowing everywhere. And we'll just go in here and we'll just paint a little bit. And you can see how those flowers are coming in focus. They were just right on the edge of the mask, so it couldn't get them all. But we'll just make a nice brush across the very top part of these flowers, and everything will be in focus from front to back till we get to the tree line, and then it's out of focus. So here is the picture before blur, a lens blur. Here's the picture after lens blur. Really nice work, which is very minimal manual changes. Okay, in this last example, I want to show you some refinement techniques that I use when I have very sharp edges or the blur is kind of causing artifacts. So in this one, we've applied the lens blur, and I really want to narrow down the focal range, focus range, because I want really good blur in my greens, and I want them to contrast really nicely here. But in doing so, I lose some of the focus on the tips of my leaves here, and I start to get kind of a halo or sharp edge in these violets as they contrast against the greens. But we have a way to fix all these. So to start out with, we're going to go to focus. We're going to use a really small brush with 100% of amount and feather and flow set at 100. And we're just going to clean up the edges of these leaves and bring them in focus just by painting on focus here. And you can use auto mask if you don't have a steady hand and get all these areas back in focus. Now, I'm not going to hit everything. I just wanted to show you the technique. So using our focus brush, we were able to bring all these areas back so I have a nice focused area on this plant here. Now what I want to do is make these edges look smoother. To do that, we want to bring the amount, first we want to choose blur, because if we don't change our brush, any changes we try to put in effect will also affect this last brush we use. So we're going to click on blur. We're going to bring our amount to about 90%, and everything else, small size, 100% feather and flow. And we're just going to paint once along the edge of this flower. We'll start right here. We're just going to paint once right along here, and don't worry about the way it looks. We're going to fix that. All right, so now we've painted along this edge, because I don't like the way, because there's so much contrast between these colors, it doesn't look very, very smooth. So once we have that in place, we then adjust our amount slider till we get just the right amount of feather on the edge of these petals. And see how much nicer that looks? And we can do the same thing right here. Let's get a new brush. We'll click the plus, because we don't want to affect this that we've already done. And I'm just going to paint along the edge of this flower petal like this. And once I have it in place, I then change the amount slider till I get a nice smooth edge. And that way we have a nice transition between these two complementary colors. And that's why we get that sharp edge, because they are complementary, and there's a large amount of contrast between the two. Okay, before I end the video, just a few more quick tips to help you along. When you apply the lens blur effect and you make any changes in your focus range and you can't remember exactly where it was, all you have to do is double click right within the bounding box, and it will take it right back to the beginning to where it was when you first started. You can also do the same thing by clicking the subject icon here. It'll take you back to the beginning, and everything will be just as when you first launched Lens Blur. Now also, Lens Blur does not like to be in first. If you're going to do any remove AI, you'll see that it says remove edits are applied to the unblurred image. For best results, apply with lens blur edits turned off. So if you're going to be doing any removal AI in Lightroom, please turn off lens blur, or don't even do lens blur till you've done all the remove, and that way you won't run across any problems. And the last thing I'm going to mention, it works in just about every panel in Lightroom. Once you have your changes in place, if it's just not something that you wanted, you just want to get rid of it all at once, hold your Option key down, Alt on PC, and you'll get the Reset Lens Blur. Click on that, it'll take it right back to 0. If you just turn off the Apply button, it leaves all the settings as you left them. By using the Option Reset, it sets everything back to the way it was before any changes were made. All right. I hope all this helps out. If anybody has any questions, please shoot me an email. I'll be glad to help out. If you have any tips that you didn't hear, please send me an email. I'd love to hear them. And I will talk to you all real soon.